Hello and welcome to a new episode of Leadership Lanes. Today we have Prajakta Kalekar with us, and she'll be talking about failing fast in large teams and products. Prajakta is a seasoned engineering leader with over 18 years of experience in developing large scale products across Google, Stripe, and currently at Xero. Given her experience in 0 to 1 and growth stages of software development, she's here to share her insights about how to fail fast with intention. Welcome to the podcast, Prajakta.
Hey Abhijit, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting.
So let's start with the basics, right? So, can you briefly explain what fail fast actually means?
Yeah, so the concept of fail fast was popularized by Eric Ries in his book, The Lean Startup. And in this book, he talks about the importance of quickly testing ideas, learning from failures, and then iterating rapidly to achieve success. And this is more with the startups point of view. And why this is important is that the idea is to really run shorter experiments that you could learn from quickly, abandon the experiments that don't show much promise, and then double down your resources on the promising ones. And so, as you can imagine, this leads to reduced resource costs, and it also leads to higher quality of end product because you've made earlier adjustments, in the early stages of your software development cycle versus last minute changes.
That's quite interesting, right? And you have a background of running large scale teams as well, right? So, how does this concept apply in large scale teams and products? Typically, when the stakes are too high, right? When it comes to teams, budgets, etc.
Yeah, that's a great observation. So this concept, it doesn't just apply to startup. It does apply to large scale teams and products where you are working with ambiguity. And this ambiguity could be of many different types. Like it could be a user facing ambiguity, or will the user find this new product feature useful or will they find it annoying? Or this ambiguity could be technological. Like, what is the best design that helps us overcome this particular scalability bottleneck? It could also be a regulatory ambiguity. Like, can we really adapt our software quickly to the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape? So, it applies in many different scenarios. And as you can imagine, in large scale companies, you do have a lot of such ambiguous problems that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I also want to say that in this particular macroeconomic environment, we are all learning to work with leaner teams. So this concept becomes even more important so that you could save resource costs early in your software development cycle instead of over investing in the wrong direction.
Got it. Got it. That was quite insightful. And a follow-up to that question, what do you think how the leadership reacts to this approach? What is your key mantra, I would say, to convince the leadership in case there is a pushback? Because it's an iterative approach, right? So at times the results are not quantitative to justify.
Yeah, yeah. So, like leadership usually is interested in making sure that you're moving towards your North Star. You're not like investing in the wrong direction. And they're also very interested in making sure you'd be meeting all the committed timelines. So, as like you observed with the fail fast approach, it might appear to leadership that, hey, you're constantly failing. You're not reporting any progress here. So it's natural for them to worry if you're actually moving in the right direction or are you even moving towards your committed timelines. So in this scenario, I think it's really important to explain the approach that you're taking to your leadership. And the way I would explain it is that, look, these are the ambiguous parts of my project. These are the high risk parts of the project that we are working on. And really, what we are doing is we are front loading the high risk and high ambiguity work. And that we are also time bounding this, right? At the end of this fast fail period, we would have disambiguated or we would have retired the risk, and from then onwards we could just go ahead and double down on the things that work out. Like, to give you an example, we could say that, hey, look, we are going to spend 1 quarter on design, and prototyping and load testing to validate that design. And so it might seem to you like, hey, we've not done anything useful, nothing user facing. But then the good thing that we are doing that is that we are disambiguating this project. So I think it's important to explain this to leadership.
We talked about leadership from your perspective. I'm trying to move tracks a bit and putting you in that leadership role and think as a leader, how do you instill the real philosophy behind the fail fast, fail often approach onto your teams, right? It actually means to be iterative, but I mean, someone who hears it for the first time, it kind of makes it sound like it's not what it means. And we must be open to kind of failure as well in this case. So how do you like instill that philosophy in your team members who are actually like doing some hands-on stuff?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Like fail fast may not sound like we are going to succeed. So maybe the way to frame it is that fail fast really means learn fast or disambiguate fast or de-risk fast before over investing in the wrong direction. So, so first of all, let me first talk about why it's hard sometimes for teams to embrace this fail fast or disambiguate fast philosophy, right? As builders, we really thrive in an environment of certainty. You know, if you're going to have multiple sprints where we say, okay, yeah, we experimented with this, not sure if this is the best approach. Let's go try these other approaches. So it feels like you're not really making progress, and this may not feel naturally motivating to the team. The second reason why, it's hard to embrace this philosophy sometimes is just the sunk cost fallacy, which tends to kick in. So, you've already invested a few weeks in this, team naturally wants to say, no, not sure if this is a problem. Let me try doing this tweak, that tweak. And, people don't easily embrace or acknowledge the learnings so far, and they may not be that open to pivot. So with that context about, why the philosophy is not that trivial to just embrace. So what can you do as a leader to instill that philosophy, to encourage that philosophy? So I feel the first thing is you create the right environment, right? And you have the right messaging around this. The way I would message it is that, look, we want to adopt an experimental mindset. And this is very different from, having this reckless mindset in some sense that, hey, we will just go experiment recklessly and not have too much due diligence. That's not our goal. What the messaging is, the true philosophy that I would try to instill in my team is that, look, let's adopt iterative processes. So let's have agile development. And so that naturally encourages being iterative, having sprints, and also having retrospectives, because I think that is also very critical, where you do a retro about this experiment and then you truly embrace whether it's something you would pivot away from or you would double down on. um, I also want to add, which I think is very important as a leader, is that you can't just speak about a philosophy without aligning incentives. So it is important to reward this kind of mindset, reward team members who show experimentation mindset, who look at innovative approaches. So I think like good messaging, a good process, as well as closing the loop with good incentives, I think that really helps.
That's an interesting take actually. And one follow-up to that on this is right. One aspect of it is to instill this kind of philosophy in your team. And the other aspect which you already talked about was pivot. How easy it is for you to ask your team to let go if you want to pivot. Because I've seen engineers, I'm not categorizing or I'm not generalizing, but I've seen engineers get attached also to a lot of features or a lot of work that they have done, and throwing away work also. It's kind of, it hurts. I mean, to be honest. So how do you make sure like motivate your team in that case also to pivot if at all things are not going well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts with a very intentional phase that, look, we are in this phase of de-risking, we are in this phase of disambiguating, and so hence we are adopting this agile framework. And of course, that doesn't mean that engineers will not get attached or not have a sunk cost fallacy. But I feel having a process where you encourage retros, for example, where if not an individual, but a group will recognize that, hey, look, maybe it's time to pivot away. So, having a good retro or a good review, I think, is also very crucial here.
So moving on to the large teams construct, right? And in large teams and bigger products, moving away from the fail fast approach, how important do you think it is to get it right the first time?
Yeah. Um, it really depends on the situation. Look, fail fast doesn't always make sense, right? It makes sense when situations are ambiguous, where user feedback and learning is available at low stake. So, of course, it means that you do need a user to be giving you feedback. Like, to give you an example, you may be a B2C startup and you could try something which I found very useful. It's called prototyping, which Alberto Savoy, he talks about this. You could do a limited launch, for example. In B2B environment, you could have design partnerships where you're working super close with your customers. However, getting it right the very first time would be preferable in a more high stakes or safety critical situation where errors can have severe consequences, where, to give you an example, say a startup could embrace this approach when they're trying to launch a chatbot using LLMs, could embrace fail fast for PMF. But can Google really do this when they're introducing a new feature in Google search? Not really, because the stakes are much higher. You don't want to go GA with a feature that has a risk of being annoying, for example. And you do need to do a lot more due diligence there. So yeah, getting it right the first time does matter in scenarios where the stakes are high in terms of user perception or in terms of compliance or regulatory risk.
That is true. We all saw with the Gemini fiasco recently. So, yep.
Yep.
That's right. So, moving on to the next question again. So, this again, right? This is probably kind of a follow-up to the earlier questions. And how do you make sure that your team is not thinking short term? Because it kind of, when you go into that iterative approach, right, it kind of becomes too agile at times, and you kind of lose the long-term vision of what your product should do, and just stay in that always iterating mode and always pivoting mode.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I do feel that this fail fast mode, it's good to be intentional about what your short term goals are and versus what your longer term strategic approach is. And it's important to time bound this fail fast period in some way. And once you've time bound, you could then, review your progress, on a good cadence, and then make sure you're tracking towards your longer term goals. It's also important, if at the end of that period you've really not hit anything meaningful that's tracking towards your longer term goals, then that's a problem, right? So yeah, it is important that while you are failing fast, you shouldn't be reckless about this. You should really spend the time to learn from your failures, and maybe even not after your failures, maybe even before that, anticipate, right? And I think one very interesting framework that I found effective is that of something called pre-mortems. I heard about it for the first time when I joined Stripe. And if you haven't heard about it, refer to Shreyas Doshi's video on this. He really has a fantastic video on this topic.
It's very coincidental that they just taught about pre-mortem to us in today's class. So it's like it's very coincident that we are discussing that right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm so glad that this is being taught now. I had to learn it on the job. I wish I knew about it. But really, like, pre-mortems are super powerful because they let you think about failures in a psychologically safe way. I really would encourage you to check out that video. Shreyas Doshi talks about it. And, that way the team does end up thinking long term even during sprints.
Moving on to the next question here. So, how do you ensure that the fail fast, fail often mantra is not at the expense of creativity or critical thinking? And in your opinion, what is the UX or the user experience take here in this whole approach, typically in larger teams and products?
Yeah, you're
Uh,
absolutely
I
right.
I would probably extend the question to not just UX but even product.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely right. It's not just about UX, it's about your larger software development in general, right? So you're right. Often fail fast or agile approach leads to thinking that we should just move fast at all times, right? And what that leads to, with very justified in the initial stages of your PMF, what it leads to is a lot of Jenga like code building, right? Like you have a Jenga block, like things can fall over anytime. There's spaghetti code all over. Leads to fragmented user experience, leads to very brittle code. But over time, this Jenga kind of a spaghetti code is going to lead to bottlenecks in your software development. And when you're doing scalable software development, you need a good balance between such sprinting cycles and deep design and re-architecture cycles. There needs to be a balance, and as leaders it's important to recognize that when do you shift gears, when do you move from it's okay, add in some throwaway code, build up some tech debt, but then you need to be intentional about, okay, now this, let's shift gears into a good design, a good re-architecture. Let's shift gears um, into building these Lego blocks almost, right? Like which are building blocks. So example is like during your initial PMF, a team may adopt fast fail approach, but I would say that as it gets more complex, right, it is important to take these intentional shifts to re-architecture and investing in your building foundational building blocks. It does help to go to move slow sometimes in order to move fast in the long run.
Got it. Got it. That actually is pretty important, to be honest, because your debt keeps on increasing and it kind of is not manageable at one point of time then.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the last question, and this typically is I've faced this issue personally as well a lot of times. So how do you keep yourself and your team from being discouraged by the fail fast approach? Because when you have to pivot, essentially, it's difficult, and at times egos are also involved in this whole setup. And how do you make sure that the team itself is not being discouraged?
Yeah, yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like, so if you have a string of failures initially, you might feel like, hey, I'm not making progress. So I think starting with intention, right? Like starting with, hey, look at the bigger picture. Look at the fact that we are going to have this phase when there will be failures, like just normalizing it. There will be failures, but look, we do have some alternatives that have high chances of working out, right? And so really embrace the failure as being learnings. Treat them as little victories where, look, I dodged a bullet and now I'm finally moving towards this grand thing, which is, most likely going to lead to success. So yeah, I really encourage the team to, start with intention, keep looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, that was a good one. So thanks a lot, Prajakta, for coming on this podcast. It was great talking to you. Very great insights. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Abhijit. It was a pleasure.